Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about My Adventures with Superman, Season 2, Episode 5. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We're picking up in the aftermath of last episode where our trio is kind of all in awkward spaces. Clark is kind of, things between him and Lois are kind of awkward because Clark's got things he hasn't had a chance to talk to Lois about. Lois has things she hasn't talked to Clark about, but that all kind of gets even more complicated. It was supposed to start off fun, but then it gets more complicated as the episode turns out because Perry puts them on it's almost like a bachelor situation for Superman. He's like, oh, Metropolis's most eligible bachelor, and so it's kind of a bit competition, which I love. Kat wants to be the one who does it, but it kind of ends up going to Lois and Clark and Jimmy because they are the trifecta. They're the closest to Superman, so it makes sense to have the Superman A-team on it. But Kat is just like going on and on. And once again, I love like that thing about Kat just being like, yeah, I got to make the whole thing about me. And once again, spotlight and everything, microphone, and Perry's just trying to get a word in and she won't stop. So she convinces Lois to let her go along with it because it's like, hey, if you don't, we both know that we know the truth about Superman, his secret. So you're like, okay, so what does Kat know? It's funny, just and ironic. This actually is interesting how this all ties together in my head. It's funny that Kat Grant realizes that Kara Danvers in the show Supergirl is Supergirl, but doesn't realize that Clark Kent is Superman, despite her actually having a big crush on. So it's almost interesting how like she doesn't even recognize like Clark as Superman, and obviously Kara also being in this episode, which I'll get to that in a second. So that's the gymnastics my head makes connection wise, thinking that's kind of funny, but because like I said, Clark and Lois were joking about it, like, oh, like, you know, Clark being into this very stubborn reporter. She's like, I think you mispronounced brilliant, and it's like them being all cute and everything. But once again, it's still awkward because Clark is trying to ignore what he heard from like Lois's conversation with her dad last episode. To be fair, he didn't hear all of it because she's like, yeah, he's a weirdo and he's different, but I love that about him. But then Lois is just dealing with the whole element of, well, I got this great opportunity to work with Vicky Vale and be her second in Gotham at the Gotham Gazette, but it's like, how do you break that news to Clark? Because it's like, will this turn into a long distance relationship? Like a lot of those questions come up. So like I said, it starts off a little fun, especially when it's like Kat. Well, but then it takes a turn when Kat's like, hey, I'm going to do everything I can to find out whoever this significant other is. Because whoever it is that's in this competition, the finalists, obviously one of them has got to be Superman's significant other. Like they've got to secretly be dating or whatever. And so if I can find out who they are, I could be a step closer to finding out Superman's identity, which Lois is like, cool, I can't let her find out that I'm dating Superman because then she's going to find out that it's actually Clark. But that's kind of a moot point. And it causes all this complication because Lois tells Clark, like, yo, when you're Superman doing your thing on stage, be extra distant or whatever. And it was even cute. He was saying like listing all these things that he's looking for in a significant other, and he lists all these characteristics about Lois, and she's kind of like, stop it. And he's like, oh, but she needs to be a tall surgeon. It's really adorable. It's also sad too, like the double-edged sword of it, because Lois started getting jealous the moment, someone started paying a lot of attention, like, Silver St. Cloud started getting a little too touchy-feely. She didn't like that. But also, she's so accomplished. Everyone on that stage is accomplished. Which I'm also like, is Hank Henshaw gay in the comics or whatever? Because I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, you're here as kind of like a finalist. Because like Superman's supposed to be like the finalist on his own, but then like there's going to be another, like amongst that panel supposed to be the finalist as well. So not unless Hank Henshaw's there just on like, he's supposed to be a finalist on the Clark side of thing, but like Clark was supposed to Superman's supposed to be a finalist all on his own. So that's what I thought was interesting. Which, speaking of, well, two things. Hank Henshaw, I didn't realize that's who that character was. Maybe they said his name because he popped up last episode, but he was in episode 2 because he's the one that pointed them towards, the Kryptonian ship in like Antarctica or whatever in episode 2. I think that's the same character. He's definitely the dude from last episode, but I want to say it's the same dude from Star Labs in episode 2. Like I said, I didn't notice the name until now. I was like, did they never say his name before? Maybe they did in episode 2, but hearing Hank Henshaw, I'm like, wait, Hank Henshaw, as in aka Cyborg Superman, and it's like, hell yeah. So it's like, cool, the Superman hate makes a lot of sense. I'm not well versed in Cyborg Superman. Because I know he's one of the alternate costumes for one of the Injustice games, if I'm not mistaken. I think so. But my only experience with him is the Supergirl TV show. He didn't pop up that much, because you had John Jones pretending to be Hank Henshaw, but like Hank Henshaw does return later on as Cyborg Superman. But like other than that, I feel like that's my only real experience with him. But yeah, like he shows his colors. Like he was part of that crowd last episode that was very anti-Superman, and it kind of makes sense. You being Cyborg Superman and hating him and everything, so you also joining up with Waller and siding with her and Lex. Once again, it all kind of fits on that anti-Superman agenda, because he's like, oh, everything that went down in Star Labs. I'm like, did you not notice? What about is there no security footage at Star Labs to be like, oh yeah, there were people that broke in, like. You're not saying anything about the people that were there attacking Lois and her dad. To be fair, there probably is no security footage because, it's like, well, it's, this Task Force X is doing everything to cover their tracks. But I mean, like, you're making it seem like Superman went in there destroying the place on his own just for shits and giggles, But then, like, Silver St. Cloud was like, excuse me, you forget that freaking 30-foot monstrosity that attacked the city in episode 9? That being, Parasite. It's like, yeah, he saved the day, but he's like, yeah, you don't have me fooled. Earth is just for Earthlings, So not only Hank Henshaw, but I looked up Silver St. Cloud because I was like, who is she? I was like, is she a superhero or something? It's like, no, she's a regular person. At first I was like, oh, is she gonna be like, because I know Clark has even outside of Lana and Lois, they're the only two love interests of Superman's Clark's that I'm well versed enough in. But I've never stepped outside of it because I think he's dated Wonder Woman before, hasn't he? Or is that Batman that has? I can't remember. I want to say like him and Wonder Woman have dated, Clark and Diana. But either way, she is a regular person, but she's from a like wealthy family. In fact, I looked it up. I didn't realize like I was familiar enough with the character because she popped up in season 2 of Gotham. Because I don't remember if it was a different school he went to at that time, Bruce. Or whether it was like, because she's like from a prestigious family. Like I do like vaguely, because like I'm blanking on the actress's name. It's like it's Natalie something who portrayed her in the TV show, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that character to some extent. It's been a long time. It's been a couple years, so I don't remember everything. But I had vague memories of like, oh okay, so. But I'm not well versed enough in the character. It's interesting that a character that is typically Batman's love interest or Bruce Wayne's love interest is now in this show as Superman's potential love interest, or just for dating show purposes. Thought was so interesting. That's actually kind of really interesting how that plays out. But yeah, like I think I strayed away from a point I was also making earlier, and that was about Lois feeling insecure, because it's like, once again, this season is really hammering home the differences. Like, Clark's feeling it, but Lois isn't really aware of how Clark's feeling about things. She knew to some extent because of episode 2, but it's just kind of like, right, you have your dad bad-mouthing Superman, you have so many people bad-mouthing Superman, but you also have people being like, oh my god, Superman's amazing, which I was actually surprised by, that only Hank was the one bad-mouthing Clark, considering how everything was so sideways last episode. But that's a very specific group of people that was there. Majority of the city still loves Superman, so I think that was kind of like what's kind of getting hammered home in this as well. But for Lois, it's a lot of her insecurities of like, Clark, Superman's amazing and stuff like that, but like, what about someone like me? I'm the one that broke the first story. But it's like, yeah, but Silver, she did all this. At 13, she's well accomplished. It's like, look at everyone on that stage. The lowest end of special amongst those people is a person that climbed Mount Everest like 7 times. It's like, how are we as reporters going to really compare? It's like, because even Kat's not putting herself in that same echelon. She's very hoity-toity and pretty much has that Hime, like, the stereotype to her, like anime character wise. But even she's like, yeah, we're just regular people. We as reporters, we kind of report on the stories, lives that are not our own. We don't become a part of the story, which Lois is a part of Clark's story. So she is part of the story, but like this kind of made her start feeling insecure and seeing him chuckling it up with all these special people. Because she was like, right, I'm special. But she doesn't really, like, she starts feeling less special, because it's like, how can I compare? Like, you are this, like, sensational, you are this superhero. You're not even superhuman. You're just, like, you are an alien and you're this powerful hero. Like, how can I compare? Like we don't make sense, especially because we haven't really communicated. Things have just been like just other things have come up. Clark not wanting to feel so alone because he's reaching out to his cousin. Lois dealing with everything with her dad, which makes her feel as alone. And it just at a time when they're both feeling so alone, they would have each other, but the other stuff just keeps getting in the way. And they don't even have Jimmy there to kind of glue them back together, to kind of be that third wheel, but also kind of bring them close. I thought that was kind of an interesting development all around. But also on the flip side, speaking of Jimmy, like I brought up earlier, him avoiding Clark, I thought it was so interesting the moment we saw the blonde girl, was like, and we saw the symbol on her jacket. I was like, wait, Kara? I'm like, Jimmy's just gonna randomly stumble into Kara running around Metropolis? I was like, wow, I didn't expect that. I was like, that's so interesting. I didn't notice her bracelet. I was like, wait. I was like, that's interesting. Like, that does look like Kryptonian tech. I was like, what's going on here? So jumping ahead a little bit, well, her and Jimmy spend time together because she's like, right, I'm looking for a guy, a warrior. And he's like, oh, of course you are. And she's like, yeah, I'm looking for my cousin. He's like, oh, cousin. I have plenty of cousins. Because I thought that was so interesting. I was like, wait, are we setting up a Jimmy and Kara thing? Because I don't know much about, for one, Kara's dating life in the comics. I know the TV show, and obviously that didn't like pan out a lot of times for her in the dating world. She kind of walks away from the series like single pretty much, because like her dating situation doesn't ever like, you know, not like she needs a significant other, but it just thought it was interesting. So I don't know much about her dating life in the comics. My only association with Jimmy and his dating life is the show Smallville, where him and Chloe dated, and that's something they eventually added to the comics. I don't know if Chloe's his go-to significant other in the comics still, but I know post Smallville, it might even still been well when Smallville was still originally airing. Very much like how Harley started off in the Bruce Timm 90s Batman the Animated Series, and then she was eventually added to the comics. Chloe's the same way. I think I remember reading that like a couple years back. Like, she eventually got added to the comics as Jimmy's typical girlfriend. Like I said, I don't know if that's changed over the years or not. But so that's why I thought was kind of interesting going down that route, being like, oh, and it kind of would be an interesting thing of like, because I think it'd be an interesting thing for Clark, where it's like, hey, my cousin and my best friend are dating, but it's also kind of like a, hey, Lois and Jimmy are both dating Kryptonians, and just kind of like the oddball nature of that. But it's like, yeah, like, she obviously hasn't been on Earth that long because she knows the language and stuff like that, obviously able to kind of quickly pick it up, most likely with tech. But I mean, to be fair, like, the Kryptonians have a tendency to pick up, well, I think Clark's pretty good with languages typically in like the comics, because I know like with his brain, the way it operates on a superhuman level, he is able to pick up stuff. I think he has like an eidetic or like photographic memory to some extent. I think I could be mistaken. That might be kind of in his repertoire of abilities. He hasn't quite gotten to that point yet, but he is typically very good with languages. So that's why I'm also wondering, like, is it tech that makes Kara understand English and able to speak it? But you can tell, like, it's kind of broken English. Understandable, she just got here. But, yeah, like, her spending time with Jimmy. And I love that. I was like, of course she's going to, like, when this soccer ball came, I was like, she's going to kick it, and Jimmy's not going to see her superhuman strength. But yeah, like, he introduced her to mint chocolate ice cream, hot dogs, and we're having fun, and it's just kind of like, oh, this is actually kind of a sweet date. And it's not to the very end that it's like, wait, your cousin is Superman? Wait, the best friend I've been avoiding? Because him and her had like this really interesting conversation where it's like, he's like, yeah, like, I come here all the time to see this view with Lois and my best friend. She's like, why do you say like that? Is this best friend of yours an enemy? Because if they are, they're an enemy of mine now. He's like, no. Have you ever done something where you screwed up so big that you just don't know how to make it right? And she's like, yeah, I know. And she's like, my dad told me not to go here. The moment she said that, I was like, hold up, wait a minute. I was like, your dad. I was like, your dad died on Krypton along with Clark's parents. Well, your parents in general died on Krypton with both Clark's parents. But then I was like, not unless we're making it so her dad's still alive. But then immediately I was like, wait, the person that was in armor at the beginning of the episode, which makes me wonder, because it's the same armor we've seen previously too. I think that's the same suited person we saw pop up from time to time in season 1. Especially like at the end. I want to say that must have been Kara, not the one she responds to as Primus. I didn't get a good look enough at the helmet, because it does seem like there is some like decorative edging to it that kind of delineate it from from like the other armor, kind of showcasing like, oh, this is a higher ranked person. But the moment that was kind of said, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I was like, could your dad be Zod? Because I had to remind myself, like, as we learned in episode 1, whereas once again, I keep saying typically, my association is just with Supergirl, the TV show, but I also think the animated series touched on it too. Kara was a little older. That makes her, that's what adds to her differences with Clark. Clark was a baby, so he doesn't remember anything about Krypton, whereas she was a little older, so she has memories and knowledge of Krypton, so that adds a different layer in their perspectives on things, you know, especially Krypton. So either way, my point for bringing that up is going back to the point I brought up previously. I was like, are we going to find out that Kara is actually evil in this continuity? And she pseudo is. I was like, that's an interesting dilemma for Clark to be in this situation, to make it so that she is, you know, it kind of almost just coincides a little bit with kind of, it's not a one-to-one, but I wonder if they take a little bit of inspiration from Woman of Tomorrow, like the movie is going to pull from that comic, where you have a Kara who's got a little more edge, where she is kind of, well, because we're talking about, once again, she was a baby when she got sent to, and once again, why Clark landed on Earth and she didn't. Once again, maybe it was a Phantom Zone situation, black hole, wormhole thing, not black hole, wormhole sent her somewhere else, and maybe that's how she met up with Zod and them, if that is Primus, if that ends up being who he really is. Or like I said, could just actually be her actual biological dad who just broke bad and was evil, but it could also just be a situation of, okay, so, you know, like Zod, like, raised her, so she knows she's an L and everything, so, because she says father, so not unless Zod's hiding his identity and pretending to be her actual father or something like that, or he, like I said, maybe she just does call him father because, hey, he raised me since I was a child, an infant, so, and it becomes that Superman storyline thing, like the Reds, because this is interesting too, because it almost feels a little like they're doing the Red Daughter storyline, because, you know, there is the Red Son storyline, whereas instead of growing up in Kansas, Smallville, being raised by the Kents, Superman is raised in, I don't know if it's specifically Soviet Russia or just Russia in general, and how differently he turned out, how a lot of the world turned out differently. Well, in the Supergirl TV show, they did equivalency of that and made it a Red Daughter storyline. So it almost feels like there's a little bit of that to this extent too, of like, right, you had that dilemma of like, oh, see what happens when you, oh, this is what Clark and who he is and all that he represented and his values, being raised on Earth, raised by the Kents, versus Kara, who was raised by Zod, which, once again, it seems like the Kryptonians as a whole. It doesn't just seem like, because I always associate the conquering, terraforming person to be Zod. Find out it's like, oh, it's like the Kryptonians were all about that too, just because they probably looked at themselves as like a higher end species that was better than everyone else. Maybe that was a division, because Krypton, like I said, I've talked about previously, has covered the, like, the hierarchy and like the social class of Krypton. So it could just easily be a thing of some people were all about that. I mean, Zod is a general, so that could definitely be like a militaristic move to, oh, we're going to conquer these planets. Whereas like the more brainiac-y, and not like Brainiac, but like the smart, like higher class society people are not about that, or maybe they are. I don't know. You know, that is going to be interesting to kind of dive into that more, but Kara is kind of disgusted with this world, because she's like, right, it's this and that, but she came all this way to find her cousin, and she finds this place like annoying and loud, and the way he's getting paraded around, it's like, oh, no, I came here to find a warrior, but I found a disappointment instead. So it's kind of like the 1-2 punch for Clark. At this point, Lois is trying to break up with you because she thinks you're not meant to be together, and then before you can even get a resolution to that, Kara busts up the function, summons up the armor. It's like, cool, you either join me on some Viltrumite type of shit. I mean, I'm sure, like, obviously, like, Invincible and the Viltrumites do take a lot of inspiration from, like, Superman, and, I mean, obviously, Invincible, like, takes a lot of inspiration from, like, other stuff, and just kind of put it, you know, Kirkman and them kind of put their own spin on it and stuff like that. But either way, her suiting up and then knocking them all over the place. And so I'm sure someone's going to try and fight me on like, oh my God, you're so woke. But like, isn't Kara, maybe not always, but isn't she typically stronger than Clark sometimes? Like, I think it happens from time to time where she is stronger than Clark. I mean, she displayed it here, but also like she does have tech on her side that kind of probably like even the scales even more. But like she's probably come into her powers, because like Clark is still discovering stuff, and who's to say Kara has like fully developed everything she's capable of either. But yeah, Clark doesn't even want to fight her, but it turns into a brawl, like, you know, very like, you know, I always love that aesthetic of just like blurred, like fast moving lines bumping into each other thing. And Clark's trying to keep Kara from causing mass destruction. He's trying to avoid being around people, you know? And especially because, I mean, how many people heard the conversation of, wait, that's my cousin Kara? Or, you know, that's going to be an issue if she stays on Earth too. Well, depends on how many people got a good look at her. So, you know, she probably had to change her hair a little bit, change aesthetically. It's like, oh, this planet's going to have 2 Kryptonians. I mean, that also depends. Like, when it's all said and done, Kara will probably go off-world because, like, this world doesn't need another super person, you know. And she's like, yeah, I'll check in on you from time to time because I'm thinking way ahead. We've still got a lot of the season left to go. I'd assume this season's going to be 10 episodes like the previous one was. So we're, like, at the halfway point, so... But I also thought it looked badass when, like, the armor, like, broke and, like, you see her face. But also, there is still humanity there. It becomes that nature versus nurture thing where she, like, even she had her reservations about going so hard in a pain against Clark. But then, like, as we saw, like, Primus made her comply. So there is a little brainwashing going on. But she's also, like, you know, indoctrinated into the cult that is, yo, we're about, like, domination. And it's like, is it even a cult? Is it just, like I said, it just depends on how much of Krypton society was really all about conquering. Was that a small militaristic portion, or was that just like the philosophy of Krypton? Because like I said, once they introduced that in episode 1, that like they are full conquerors, that isn't just a Zod thing, I was like, that's interesting, because I've never known Krypton to be depicted in that way. Once again, very few things have really get you dived into like Kryptonian society and stuff like that, except for like Krypton. That was the whole basis of that show, kind of give you that opportunity to see through that lens. So I've never seen them be the conquerors, except for, like I said, like your Zods and stuff. So Clark does unlock another ability. It seemed like it's supposed to be his freeze breath, but maybe it like upgraded, because he's had his freeze breath before, but now it was like a freeze beam. So it seems like it's more of a, like I said, it just feels like it probably got upgraded, because after the blast, you know, beam struggle, it starts snowing. Like there were snowflakes in the air across Metropolis. But yeah, Primus is like, cool. Like Clark is showing himself to be interesting, because that's why I'm starting to wonder, like, it's Clark in a, like, when he saw that, he was like, oh, so there's more to you, because maybe Clark's unlocking certain abilities that other Kryptonians never do. Or like kind of shows that his development is further ahead than theirs, where it's like, oh, at such a young age, he's learning these abilities that took others a long time, or maybe he's like I said, getting abilities he shouldn't have in general. But like I said, Kara ends up getting the win in the end, because she's willing to do anything for Krypton, and she ends up taking Clark, and Jimmy and Lois have to watch as she does. So once again, just everything's going wrong. Just when that group is kind of falling apart, this all ultimately ends up happening. So it is definitely going to be really interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward. This will probably be Clark's opportunity to learn about Kara's story and her circumstances of what led her to where she was, but also finding out more about Krypton. Like I said, how much is truth, how much is being spun and told and lied to Kara. Like maybe she, you know, very cultish, where it's like, oh, you believe this thing, but it's kind of BS. You were alone and someone took advantage of you, where it's like Clark isn't alone. Despite feeling alone, he still has people who care about him. But when the world is slowly turning against you, and there's a very minority group of people who like kind of pushing for that, it's going to wear you down a little. Oh yeah, I should also mention something else I thought was kind of interesting. I hope I'm not butchering her name, but Kara's voice actress's name is Kiana Madeira. I hope I'm not butchering her last name. I don't think I'm well versed. I skimmed through her filmography. There's some things like TV shows she had like guest starring roles or like one episode things on, where I'm like, I don't remember that character in particular, but I looked it up. She's actually had a DC character before now, live action wise. Apparently she played a character named Spencer Young in The Flash, and like the character's name was like Spin, and I was like, Spin is in like Vertigo and Top type of situation. I don't know if it was something like that. But as I looked at the character, I was like, I don't quite remember. But once again, it's just kind of interesting DC-wise. I mean, technically, she was also in an episode of Dark Matter, which was like based on the comic is from. Is that Dark Horse? No, that's Dark Horse. I was about to say, like, that's not Vertigo, is it? It's like, Is it? I don't remember. I have to look that up now. It's a Dark Horse comic. Never mind. Either way, I just wanted to kind of add that in there because that was something I was thinking earlier, and I just felt like commenting on it. Just kind of funny, like once again the DC and superhero connections a lot of people have in some capacities. But either way, tangents and all that aside, like I said, I'm excited to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.